Great news. There's a quick way you can save money. Switch to Geico. Geico could help you get great coverage at a great price. And it only takes 15 minutes to see if you could save 15% or more on car insurance. Go to geico.com today and see how much you could save.
Time for an oil change? Head to Jiffy Lube. We've got you covered. We've also got you covered when it comes to oil changes, thanks to Pennzoil Synthetic Motor Oil, getting you back on the road in a jiffy. Jiffy Lube. Leave worry behind.
Fantasy, you're in the 06010. Fantasy.
Picking an old school today to open up today's podcast. It's Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. It is April 10th. Good morning to all the listeners, and good morning to Matthew Berry and Stephania Bell. I am Field Yates. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Field. It is, of course, snowing here in beautiful Bristol.
Why wouldn't it be on April 10th?
Of course. It's outrageous. So lots to get to today on the show. Mm-hmm. We've got the Brandin Cooks trade. Jordan Matthews is a Patriot. You know, we've got
some other pieces of
newsy stuff out there. I've got a new love hate out. We'll dive into that, Field, as well. We've got some draft talk, of course. You, the ultimate insider, your ear to the ground, your nose to the grindstone. You're wearing your scoop hat, everything like that. Stephania's got some thoughts on Andrew Luck because she's contractually required to. So we'll get into all that and so much more. But first, I think we would be remiss if we did not take a moment to congratulate our own Thirsty Kyle. Thirsty Kyle. Weddings are in the air. Our own Thirsty Kyle putting it out there on Twitter. He is now off the market, ladies.
Congratulations, sir.
I appreciate it. Happily engaged.
Happily engaged, and this has been a long time coming. Kyle and his lovely bride-to-be have been together for the better part of a decade now.
Yeah, high school sweethearts, and we've stuck it out. I don't know what she's thinking, but we're making it work.
Okay, and this took place back near your hometown, correct?
Correct. Finger Lakes region to keep it simple, but yeah, upstate New York.
And it went on the Twitter at Kyle Soppy ESPNs. You can find the photo,
Who took the photo, by the way?
Her sister was stalking us from behind, like a window kind of thing. So she
was
didn't see
on
it
the
coming.
plan.
Yeah,
on the plan.
So
nice
sister,
job, smart.
family, everybody.
Very
was
smart.
Did your fiance like sort of was she curious as to why her sister was, or could she see her sister, or was her sister out of sight?
She couldn't really see her. We spent the whole day with her family, so it wasn't out of place for her to be there. So
gotcha.
She was part of the venue, and it worked out well.
And that means she said yes, apparently.
So listen, as someone, Kyle Soppy, as someone who's been married twice,
right?
Allow me to offer you some advice. It's what I do. The show is about advice. Usually it's about fantasy football, but I sometimes like to delve
advice that people don't take,
into dating advice,
Suit
fantasy
yourself.
advice, life advice. I'm wise and sage-like. Let's be honest about this. So
All yours.
allow me to give you at least, and over the coming months and years, I'll be imparting this wisdom upon you, upon Field Yates, who of course engaged the lovely Chapin Duke. So marriage is in the air. It's very exciting. The 06010 is filled with love. And so I just wanted to take a moment, if I could, Kyle, to tell you what you have to look forward to as a happily married man.
Okay, bring it on.
What will happen is you will bring your fiance and then a wife. You'll bring her here to Bristol, obviously, and I'm sure she will meet all of us. We'll have a grand old time. And then what will happen is that your wife will become friends with Stephania. Okay? And then what will happen is that Stephania will get your wife's phone number and say, like, oh, we should hang out sometime. At first it'll be like sort of at work events where this friendship sort of develops, right? And, or parties of mutual friends and that kind of stuff. And then eventually she'll say, oh, we should go out, just us. And then that'll turn into, oh, we should go out again, multiple times. I can speak from experience here because last Friday night I was watching my kids. Beth, my lovely wife, Stephania, my lovely wife, Beth, I should say.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. I think that pretty much says all you need to know
Stephania,
about
my work
why
wife.
Beth and I
so my lovely wife, Beth, tells me, she's like, oh, Stephania asked me to go out. She wants to go out to like happy hour on Friday. I'm like, that's fine. I said, go. I had just been on a work trip. I'm like, I'll stay home with the girls, go out and have fun. And she goes, I'm not feeling well. I won't be out that late. I'm like, great, have fun. So she leaves at like 5:30 in the afternoon, Field.
That seems a little bit early or aggressive.
When do you think she got home?
5:30 start, 10 o'clock?
I wish it was 10 o'clock.
What, 10 a.m. the next morning?
10 a.m. the next morning.
Wow.
Because we are responsible.
I mean, what's good? But I mean, like, she's texting me. She's like, "Oh, Stephania wants to do one more drink. Oh, Stephania wants to go to one more bar."
I know that those weren't the texts.
Oh,
it
my
was
goodness.
Not all on me.
Stephania needs me. I mean, like, so literally, Beth is like, once again. So now they're back at Stephania's apartment. Or condo or whatever it is you have. I've never been over.
Or house.
Whatever it is, house. I don't know what you have.
Mansion,
exactly. I don't know. It's not like I've been invited. And Beth is like, so we're there, and she goes, it's 3:30 in the morning. It's 3:30 in the morning, and I'm scrubbing up, getting ready for bed, and she goes, and there's Stephania in the doorway. Wants to keep talking. Has some cookies. That's what you have to look forward to, Thirsty Kyle.
Fantasy news from the National Football League. This is the instant replay.
Huge congratulations to Kyle and the lovely Marisa on their engagement.
I can't wait till Chapin comes down.
Yeah.
I mean, do not under any circumstances let that happen.
With Chapin, or so we think.
I've already lost my wife, Field. I'm trying to save you and Chapin.
Before she even is my wife, you're trying to save
Correct.
Okay, understood.
I'm just... Heed my advice, young
Chapin
man.
Loves us.
That's correct. And a quick note before we get to the football, just because I will be remiss not to mention this. In 6 days, the Boston Marathon will take place, 2018 Boston Marathon, excuse me. For those of you that followed along, you know that Chapin and I have been fundraising at runfieldrun.com. And the plan was for me to run this race. And the plan was for both of us to run this race. Unfortunately, because of a knee injury, I'm unable to run this race. Stephania has been a massive help in consulting along the way, and the body won't let me push past those 26.2 miles. It does not take away from the fundraising efforts that all of you contributed to, so we are immensely grateful for that. Chapin will be running the race. She is excited. She's ready to go. I think if she could, she'd run it right now to get it over with. So we look forward to Monday. For those that are going to be in Boston for the race, I will be amongst the masses cheering. Unfortunately, not running, but that doesn't take away from all the positivity that we've felt over the past handful of months.
1,000%. And for me, this is exciting because I was always going to root for Chapin anyway, but I was going to feel guilty that I wasn't rooting for you. And now the guilt is completely free. Now I can focus my entire rooting efforts entirely on Chapin Duke. Is there a social media outlet at which we can follow Chapin's progress, her results? Are you going to be live tweeting it?
I will not be live tweeting, I don't believe. But I would.
Should we follow you on Twitter at Field Yates and for updates on
Instagram? And then Chapin herself. Chapin _Duke on Instagram, where she will have the stuff that actually probably maybe the most pertinent updates, and maybe a picture after the fact.
So, all right, there you go.
That's what matters most. So it's going to be a great day. I'm so looking forward to
day, Patriots Day. I hope it's not snowing.
Say if you that we're hopeful as well. If you don't live in Boston or haven't been there for Boston Marathon,
you should fly in to root Chapin on.
That's right. It's
if you're a real fan of the 06010,
that's what you would do.
You would stalk Field. And you would root her on.
See, that's not asking too much, is it?
No. Anyway, but in all seriousness, the 06010 Nation, you guys have been so amazing in terms of raising money for the V Foundation. And kudos to Field and Chapin for putting it together. Kudos for Chapin for running the Boston Marathon. I can't even watch the Boston Marathon. Like, it's too long for me to watch.
Right. No, I understand.
So,
I'm with you there.
Anyway, but we raised, how much did we raise for the?
Like $35,000.
Wow.
So, and there's still time to contribute at runfieldrun.com.
Thank you, 060.
Push it over. And I can tell you this, the V Foundation has been immensely grateful for, they have said innumerable thanks to both Chapin and I, really, but that extends to everybody that has contributed to runfieldrun.com. So let's get into the football, because we have had quite a bit of news, or at least some news, since the most recent podcast that we conducted. And let's begin with Brandin Cooks, who last year was traded from the Saints to the Patriots. He has subsequently been traded from the Patriots to the Rams. The Patriots recoup a first-round draft pick, and there's some other picks involved as well. But, Matthew, what does it mean for the Los Angeles Rams, who, of course, needed to find a way to replace Sammy Watkins?
I thought this was a nice move for the Rams. Meanwhile, by the way, can we talk for a second about Brandin Cooks, who starts his NFL career with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and now Sean McVay and Jared Goff. Someone's living right over there. The thing is like, he's going to replace Sammy Watkins' role in the offense. Like, I thought this was a better NFL move than fantasy move. This is a downgrade for me in terms of Brandin Cooks' fantasy value, because with all due respect to Jared Goff, as well as he played last year, and you know me, I'm as big a Sean McVay believer as there is. Going from Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels and the Patriots offense, like, that's a downgrade. That's a downgrade for anyone. I'm sorry, it just is. And so, Cooks will be a speed guy. One of the things they used Watkins to do last year, Field, was to sort of spread the field and open things up for Robert Woods, open it up for Cooper Kupp, obviously Todd Gurley out of the backfield. So I thought this was a better NFL move for the Rams to give them another piece than it was necessarily from Brandin Cooks' fantasy value. I will tell you, talking to Rams personnel at the Combine, and there was still a question as to whether or not they would be able to re-sign Sammy Watkins.
Right.
Their thought process is that they're like, Woods is our number one, and we love Kupp in the slot. We'd like to have Sammy back, but I'm paraphrasing here, or how I sort of interpreted their comments. They didn't feel like that they felt like that they really like Josh Reynolds, and they're like, we probably won't replace Watkins if he moves on. So obviously they ended up doing that, but the fact of the matter is Woods is still the number one. Kupp, I think, is, an interesting guy for a deeper PPR league. I like Cooks as like a wide receiver, low end 3, wide receiver 4.
Well, and here's the reality for Brandin Cooks is even if he had stayed in New England, his value might have regressed a little bit because, of course, last year his role increased with Julian Edelman on the shelf throughout the entirety of the season. So Brandin Cooks will do a lot of the same things that Sammy Watkins did. I think it's actually good news for Robert Woods, to be honest with you, because if they didn't have a field stretcher like Brandin Cooks, Robert Woods all of a sudden doesn't have quite as much room to operate in the intermediate passing game.
I will say this.
Yeah.
He's only 24 years old, 3 straight 16-game seasons.
Yeah.
So from a reliability standpoint, and it sounds like they're interested in potentially extending him. So obviously he's hopped around lately, but the Rams like him, and if he serves that purpose, his role could grow. So I agree with you on this year, but I think that could change.
He's an unbelievably talented young man, 1,000 yards receiving and 7 receiving touchdowns each of the past 3 years. Him and Antonio Brown, the only 2 guys that can say that, Field. And I don't doubt that, but I think you'll see some touchdown regression coming from Jared Goff to begin with. I think Brandin Cooks will be one of those guys that has 3 or 4 big games, better for best ball kind of formats than necessarily season long, maybe some DFS in the right matchup and everything like that. Like I said, I think a better move for the Rams from an NFL perspective than fantasy.
Agreed on that. Let's get to the Patriots side of this trade because they now have, I wouldn't say a hole at wide receiver, but they have to find a way to reshuffle the deck a little bit. Of course, Julian Edelman will be expected to be ready for the start of next season. When he got injured, it was August of 2017, so normal timeline would make us think he'll be ready for week 1. The team also has added Jordan Matthews in a recent 1-year deal. He, of course, spent 2017 with the Buffalo Bills. From the Patriots' passing attack, Matthew, is there any reason to believe that this is going to be any worse than it was this past season when Tom Brady was named the NFL MVP?
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
business as usual.
100%. Tom Brady doesn't really throw deep all that much anymore. His game is much more short and intermediate passes. It's an offense that, relies on mismatches, obviously. Now, if for some reason Rob Gronkowski does not come back, there have been some rumors out there that perhaps he might not. I don't believe those rumors, to be honest. My expectation is that Rob Gronkowski will be suiting up for the Patriots come opening kickoff 2018.
Correct.
But if for some reason something were to happen in that, then I think you'd start you'd have to rethink things because Brady's numbers without Gronk are certainly different. But I thought this was a great move for the Patriots. Jordan Matthews, to me, is a talented young receiver who's just really struggled with injuries, Stephania, but now says he's healthy.
Well, we'll see. I mean, he ends the season on IR. He has surgery on his knee on his left side and his ankle on his right side. I think for the Patriots, it doesn't matter. Like, this is what we've seen because if a guy ends up getting hurt, they just end up, it's a plug and play enough that it's not going to cost them very much. But I think if you look at the way they structured his contract and deal,
very little of it's guaranteed.
Very, very little of it's guaranteed, and there's a ton of incentive. So incentive to try and stay healthy, incentive to perform well. We'll see, but he's another one that I want to see in training camp. What does it look like? Because last year was pretty miserable for him.
Yeah, it was miserable. He was obviously hurt in his very first practice as a Buffalo Bill. He broke, I think it was sternum.
Right when he got there.
Yeah,
he was out.
He was out from the very beginning.
And he's played with some, let's call it, inconsistent quarterback play is where I was going to go. Try to be a little nicer there. But throughout his career, whether it was in Philadelphia or in Buffalo last season, so now and he was always the best guy there, right? So he was this young guy that sort of had to carry an offense that wasn't particularly good. So now he goes to New England where he's just a piece. Yep. He's just a piece. It'll be interesting to see, obviously, because you've got Edelman. Matthews has played the slot the majority of his career. So it'll be interesting to see whether they put him outside, whether they use him as a complement to Edelman.
Edelman's not really a slot receiver, to be honest with you. So I wouldn't be surprised if he
moves all over, right?
Yeah, he's an all-over wide receiver for the Patriots. So I think that maybe the most telling part of the Jordan Matthews conversation is even the third option in this offense, in the passing offense, because we know Gronk and Edelman are fixed as number 1 and number 2. Number 3 could be Malcolm Mitchell. It could be, I think
it's Chris Hogan.
Is number 3. I'm sorry. Number 1, 2, and 3 are Hogan, Gronk, and Edelman. But number 4, then it's like, is it Malcolm Mitchell if he's healthy? Is it Jordan Matthews? Is it Kenny Britt? Is it Cordarrelle Patterson?
Or is it, frankly, James White? I mean, that's probably what it is. It's whoever's out there at running back, mostly James White, but you'll see some Rex Burkhead and, Jeremy Hill can catch a pass every once in a while. So, yeah, I mean, the running back is obviously a big part of the passing attack for New England.
But for Matthews, the first step is, of course, getting healthy.
I think Jordan Matthews is talented enough in that offense. I think he's worth a flyer at the end of your draft. That's an really interesting sort of late-round flyer.
I think for sure, and especially if we have more information about him medically by, late August or whenever you start your drafts, whether it's beginning portion of August or around Labor Day. Allen Hurns has a new home. He was cut by the Jaguars. Didn't take him long to find a job with the Dallas Cowboys. Player that has some relevance in the fantasy community because he played so well just a couple of years. But also, Stephania, he was banged up throughout much of 2017. I don't know that there's anything that was like super serious, but sort of an accumulation of a handful of injuries.
But, he had a hamstring injury that pretty much cost him a bunch of games at the end. He did come back, so you like the fact that he played in the final game. He's a grad of the U, so of course that works in his favor. But he has stepped up when he's needed to. He has been injured. He had that scary concussion injury a couple years ago. So he has been banged up during his time at the Jaguars. I think sort of inconsistent utilization in play.
Right, yeah. He's a player that was so good as an undrafted rookie in their first couple of years. He got that contract extension for, I think, 5 or 50. Obviously, in the NFL, it's all about the guaranteed money, but still, he now is a Dallas Cowboy. Matthew, we're going to get to how this ties into Dez in a second, if it does tie into Dez. But just from a pure, in a vacuum, Allen Hurns compared to Terrence Williams, compared to Cole Beasley, Ryan Switzer, where might he stack up for you there?
I think he becomes the number 2 for me. I mean, Terrence Williams seems to be kind of a situational guy. Like, we've never seen him... and obviously Dez commands so much respect. So, I mean, this obviously all changes if Dez Bryant is no longer on the Cowboys. But as of right now, Dez Bryant's a member of the Dallas Cowboys. So let's assume he goes there. I just think, for me, Beasley's sort of interesting on a PPR basis, I guess, in a deeper league. Yeah. I would prefer Hurns to Terrence Williams as it stands right now.
By the way, Terrence Williams underwent foot surgery earlier this offseason. Now, he's expected to be ready for the start of training camp, but that also ties into the Cowboys' signing of Allen Hurns is, as of right now, your wide receiver group goes Dez Bryant and then Cole Beasley and Ryan Switzer. You kind of need a bigger body like an Allen Hurns to play opposite of Dez in that role for the offseason at the very least.
It's going to be really interesting, Field, to sort of see what happens with the entire Cowboys pass catchers, because there are rumors that Jason Witten could become a broadcaster this year. Does he return to the playing field? Does he go into the broadcast booth? So there have been rumors out there that he's been pursued by not just here at ESPN, but Fox as well. So we'll see what happens there. My expectation is that he plays one more year at least, but if Dez and Witten were suddenly gone, you're like, whoa. Right. Like, I mean, honestly, I think this offense is going to, as it has been the last couple of years, revolve around Ezekiel Elliott. Yes. That Dak Prescott's going to get some points with his legs, and sort of by hook or by crook, you look up and all of a sudden he's got 20 points, Dak does. But I'll be down on Dez this year if he comes back. And Hurns is an interesting guy, but does that passing offense have enough to really sustain 2 pass-catching options outside of Witten and Ezekiel Elliott.
Not that Allen Robinson or Allen Hurns was much of a factor during the 2017 season for the Jaguars, but all of a sudden Marquise Lee's role has been reaffirmed as the unquestioned number one pass catcher in that offense that we know is going to be run heavy. But there were times last year where they had no choice but to throw it, and Marquise Lee was a steady, if not spectacular, player for them at times. And then all of a sudden, this depth chart behind him, like there may be some openings for guys like Keelan Cole, who came on strong last year to become a fantasy relevant player for 16 weeks.
It'll be interesting to see Dante Moncrief after a loss. I mean, you can't really count anything in Indy outside of Andrew Luck, but Dante Moncrief signed in Jacksonville as well. So there's some nice little pieces there. We talked in the previous show about Austin Seferian Jenkins, who they signed as a tight end as well. And look, we like to have fun with Blake Bortles. I'll raise my hand. I'm certainly, tops of that list, but give the man credit. Down the stretch last year, Blake Bortles played good football, right? He legitimately did. Yep. And so can he continue that success, especially with focus on a run game, obviously, with Leonard Fournette, with a good offensive line? I mean, they improved there. It was a good offensive line that got a lot better this offseason as well. So, Marquise Lee, I prefer Marquise Lee than to Allen Hurns. I prefer Marquise Lee to Des Bryant next year.
I don't think it's that crazy of a thought. I
want no part of Des.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't know that he's healthy. He doesn't. Go back and watch Des Bryant play last year. He didn't look like Des.
He does not look like Des, that much is for sure. And the rapport there between him and Dak Prescott is still not apparent. The Jets have, and this is not hyperbole, 17 wide receivers on their roster.
Yeah.
That, more than 25% or close to 25% of the Jets roster is just wide receivers. Terrell Pryor might be the most notable one on the roster. He was signed to a one-year deal. Stephania, on November 21st, he was placed on injured reserve because of ankle surgery. Any suggestions from the Redskins or maybe from the Jets as to where he could be at this point of the recovery process?
Well, we haven't really heard much about it, and I think he's another one where you just want to see him move and see how he does. But this was something that nagged at him for a while, and he was just trying to press through it. So I think ultimately you can look at this as a good thing for Terrell Pryor going forward, because he was definitely not himself. You could tell that he couldn't move very well. He was in a lot of pain. So ultimately, him getting it addressed, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I think the fact that he's going to be healthy, he has a clean slate. I feel like Terrell Pryor, he kind of his free agency has reminded me almost like a baseball player who goes through arbitration, right? Like 5 straight years where you're like, he's almost there, he's almost to free agency. Maybe Terrell Pryor will one day break out. He's still 28 years old. Matthew,
I feel like he broke out 2 years ago. I mean, when you got a year of Blue Apron from me.
Sure.
Thanks to Terrell Pryor.
Point.
And honestly, I thought that was that's one of my best calls. I mean, from 2 years ago, everyone was like, wait, this converted quarterback, and you're trying to trade Blue Apron for him? You're all mad that Fields stole him? Because I'd been talking him up all preseason, and then guy ends up finishing as a top 20 wide receiver on Cleveland, of all places. And listen, I think fantasy players will be very upset. Obviously, we all have short memories. And so, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to this offseason, I was sitting there in the second or third round, and I had towards the end of the second round or whatever, top of the third, and I had a choice of DeAndre Hopkins or Terrell Pryor. And I went Pryor.
Yeah.
And you look at the ADP.
Losing your league right there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so my point was, I guess, not breaking out, but becoming a consistent player.
Fair.
And do you believe that the Jets provide him the platform to be a wide receiver that is draftable?
Yeah,
Josh McCown, presumably the starting quarterback to begin the year.
Yes. Look, Robbie Anderson was really good last year.
Right.
Jermaine Kearse had, definitely had flashes of being, definitely usable. There were moments there with Austin Seferian Jenkins. Look, I thought Todd Bowles should get Coach of the Year consideration, considering the talent that was on that team and how well that team competed.
Yeah.
To be honest. And so Josh McCown did not seem to, what is he, 39 now? 38, 39, something like that?
Late 30s.
Yeah, he did not look that age.
No, he didn't.
He played very well last year. They're going to have to throw it to somebody. And I know there's a zillion wide receivers, but he's the most notable. Look, Terrell Pryor is still 6'4" and, fast as hell. There are still physical assets there with Terrell Pryor that that sort of make your eyes pop. And we've seen him have success in the NFL. It just wasn't a fit in Washington. I think he wasn't fully healthy the entire year as well. I think Terrell Pryor, whose draft day price will be so cheap because he's on the Jets and because he burned so many fantasy players last year. Yeah, I love Pryor as just kind of an upside flyer.
He's a flyer, but that's all he is right now because
100%.
there are too many Jets wide receivers. You know, we're joking about it, but there truly are too many guys who could be, in theory, their number one wide receiver going into the season. And I'm not sure that a number one wide receiver for the Jets is even a weekly starter. It could be a flex, but it may not be an unquestioned top 25 player.
That's fair, and we'll see how Robbie Anderson, who's had let's call it an interesting offseason.
Correct.
What ends up happening with that situation there. But I do think the Jets offense will be better I don't think it's going to be a great offense, but I don't think it's going to be, I think it'll be a functional NFL offense.
We'll keep it in the AFC East, where Frank Gore, the legendary Frank Gore, has a homecoming in what might be the final year of his career, but he continues on. Stephania, he goes to the Miami Dolphins, a fitting place for him to play potentially his final season.
I love this. Like, if he couldn't go back to the 49ers, I was really happy to see him go home to Miami, get 7 straight 16-game seasons.
Yeah.
For all the people who thought when he came out of college after those
prone,
really awful knee injuries that he went through, it was kind of like once he got that taken care of and he had problems with both shoulders. It was like the knees and the shoulders got taken care of, and then he's been essentially indestructible, and it's been really impressive.
And you know why, right? Because I've talked to Frank Gore, I've interviewed him, and when I've said why, what do you attribute your health and long term success to? And he's just like, I have one drink with Stephania and then I'm out. Like I don't go to the next bar. I don't go to dinner. I don't go meet this other person. Like 5:30, we have one drink and then boom, 6:30, I'm out. I'm home. Yeah, exactly. I don't sit there and just bar hop the way, Star Fania does over there.
I know how it's done. I understand it.
I mean, it was weird that he just brought that up, but
very
I'm just
selfish.
Whatever. But results are results. My wife is still banged up. Still banged up from Friday night. It's unbelievable.
Wow, that was quite a Friday night, Stephania.
You have no idea. No idea.
For Kenyon Drake, we thought, hey, listen, this guy was on maybe the precipice of stardom. I mean, he was a star down the stretch last year. And I think people were very hopeful the Dolphins would say, no, we're not going to draft the running back. No, we're not going to sign a running back. We're just going to go with Kenyon Drake and make him our workhorse. Matthew, is this signing of Frank Gore an indication that Kenyon Drake might become maybe not a part-time player, but a shared role in that backfield?
Well, I think just, that one of the things for Kenyon Drake coming out of college was that they didn't feel he was an every down back. I remember Mel Kiper talking about him. He certainly wasn't used that way at Alabama as an every down back. Obviously, they had a ton of talent there on that team, but that he was viewed more as like a third down back, more of as a pass catching specialist. Now, down the stretch, he showed he could be an every down back, but the fact of the matter is that I think this is a smart move for the Dolphins in that you get a veteran presence in Frank Gore, somebody that can sort of ease the load, if you will, off of Kenyon Drake. I'm not super panicked on Kenyon Drake because Kenyon Drake's not a guy that needs a ton of work to have fantasy value. Like, he's a big play waiting to happen. And they'll use him creatively in the passing game. Gore is a terrific pass blocker as well. I think but certainly you can't say that Kenyon Drake's value went up as a result of the signing of Frank Gore. It certainly knocks it down a little bit.
It didn't go up. I don't think it went down enough to the point that I would consider moving him outside of like a top 20 running back. I think that Frank Gore had one spot in the NFL last year where he could be basically an every down player, and that was Indianapolis. The only backfield where that was viable. In Miami, I think he's going to be much more like what Marlon Mack was in Indianapolis, a part-time player as opposed to what Frank Gore was. Going to be a little bit of a role reversal there.
I would rather draft Frank Gore as a Kenyon Drake handcuff than as anyone that might have standalone value there. I will say this, though. I put my column, shout out to the newly engaged Thirsty Kyle for pulling this stat. But Frank Gore has had at least 5 carries in every single game for 7 straight years. I mean, that's an unbelievable streak. And again, kids, the secret, don't go to happy hour with Stephania. That is the secret. If I can impart one piece of wisdom today, keep your wives away from Stephania Bell.
One more quick-hitting note here before we take a quick break is that Ben Watson returned to the New Orleans Saints on a 1-year deal. Friend of the podcast, Ben Watson had a really nice couple-year, I think it was 3-year run with them from 2013 to 2015, goes to Baltimore for a couple of seasons. I mean, I I like Ben a lot, like the player. I just don't, they've still got Kobe Fleener on the roster, Josh Hill on the roster, Michael Omanawinui on the roster amongst tight ends. Like, is he going to be?
Imagine that they all
stick around. Yes, that's a good point. It's a fair point.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to shift.
Yeah, and in 2015, I mean, it's a couple years ago, and Watson's certainly an older player now, but Watson had a very good year with Drew Brees and the Saints. I'm not sitting here saying I predict him to be back to that, but I will say whatever his fantasy value was in Baltimore, it's certainly up now that he's in New Orleans, even in a part-time role.
Well, and clearly New Orleans was motivated to add a tight end that catch the football because they flirted with a reunion of Jimmy Graham. So we know that this was not a signing that was merely, hey, something we know the player, let's just pad our depth because there are 90 players on a roster. I think there was some value there in targeting Ben Watson.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like Kobe Fleener has been just a terrific fit.
You know what, though? He had great hair when he signed in New Orleans. You can never forget that. We're taking a quick break.
Next. You're holding up the line, ma'am.
What did you say?
You're next in line for the water slide, ma'am. Feet forward and enjoy the ride.
Okay, dearie. This does look fun. Whee-oh! You melted me. I've melted.
The Wicked Witch of the West on a water slide? Surprising. What's not surprising? How much you could save by switching to Geico.
See what you've done. Oh!
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
It's New York Times bestselling author Matthew Berry with another self-serving, self-indulgent, all-about-me promo.
Want to take a moment here with my crappy promo, just to give a shout out to my dad.
Nice.
We are anti-cancer here on the 06010. We all hate cancer. Obviously, again, everyone, runfieldrun.com or jimmyv.org. But my father has spent the last, 12, 15 years of his life. My father is one of the world's greatest customer service and services marketing gurus, if you will. He's written about it extensively. He speaks about it extensively. He's been published in the Harvard Business Review many times. He's published many books on it. He's on the board of directors of a number of companies that you've heard of, and he teaches at Texas A&M. But what he has done is he's taken that customer service knowledge and applied it to the medical field over the last 12 to 15 years, and specifically cancer patients. Awesome. And he is of the belief that there is so much that can be done in fighting cancer outside of the medicine. My father's not a medical doctor. He is a doctor. He's got a PhD, but he's not a medical doctor. But outside of the medicine, just in terms of how you treat the patient, how you treat the loved ones, the care that they get, and so he recently wrote an article that was and it was so good that the Washington Post picked it up and just reprinted it over the weekend.
It's an excellent article. Somebody who worked in healthcare, coming from healthcare, we always talk about, it's one thing if people take care of the quote unquote medical problem, but we often find that patients don't improve, or they improve more quickly based on the experience that they have with the care provider. And you can't say enough about it. It was very, very good article. I recommend everybody reads it.
I appreciate that, Stephania. It's anyway, if you want to find my father's name is Dr. Leonard L. Berry. You can Google his name in Washington Post, or if you just go to my Twitter at Matthew Berry TMR, it's the pinned tweet there. The title of the article is Some Basic Acts of Kindness Found to Help Patients Dealing with Cancer. So anyway, just want to give a shout out there. Obviously, I literally just, I don't want to bring everyone down, but I literally just found out before we started the podcast that I lost someone that I was fond of to cancer yesterday. Anyway, jimmyv.org, runfieldrun.com.
Great stuff there, Matthew. We appreciate that, and obviously thinking about you during a difficult time right now. Recently, you did release a love-hate, sort of a post-free agency. Obviously, free agency continues, but post-initial wave of free agency. So what might be a couple of highlights from that piece that people can find, of course, on ESPN.com?
Well, I mean, listen, we've talked about some of them. We've talked about whether it was the previous podcast, like, McKinnon and Ajayi. We've just talked now a little bit about like Kenyon Drake and Frank Gore and everything like that. But a couple ones that I thought were sort of under the radar. Jerron Brown going to Seattle here. I've always liked Jerron Brown. Maybe I have a Jerron Brown fetish. I don't know, but he's just one of those players that I've always liked. And I'm just like, I feel like if this guy could get significant run, like again, he's 6'2", he's fast, good bodied receiver, good hands. Now he goes to Seattle, which obviously just lost a red zone threat in Jimmy Graham. Listen, you'll hear of obviously you've got Doug Baldwin there, right? You'll hear about Amara Darboh, their rookie from last year who's 6'2", Tyler Lockett as well. But I just thought this was a signing that didn't get a lot of attention. He's not going to cost very much on draft day, but I think the dividends could potentially be really big. I just think he's a talented wide receiver now going with a great quarterback in Russell Wilson on a team that's going to have some red zone opportunities, obviously. Darboh is also 6'2", but he's caught 8 passes in his NFL career, obviously, and Jerron Brown's been around for a little bit. So just somebody that I thought was sort of kind of interesting. And as long as we're talking about sort of deep threats and Seattle, Paul Richardson to the Redskins. Again, I think this is more a best ball play than somebody that you would want to target necessarily in season long. But I will say that I know that Jay Gruden's offense is predicated on the deep pass, that they really struggled not just last year, but in previous years when Deshaun Jackson was out of the lineup, whether it was injury or obviously last year he was on Tampa Bay. And so they want to take those deep shots. And my expectation is that the dink and dunk Alex Smith is not something you will see. They'll take some deep shots. They saw what he could do last year. They'll take some deep shots with Alex Smith there, try to open up that offense. So, again, assuming Jordan Reed is healthy, which is always a big assumption, but you've got Josh Dotson, who I love, who I think will have a breakout this year, and you've got Jamison Crowder. So there's a lot of people there, but we know that Jay Gruden likes to throw the ball. And so, I just thought that was kind of an under-the-radar signing as well.
What a world we live in where Twitter and tweets by players elicit fantasy reaction, but Jameis Winston, in response to a Tampa Bay Times article about what the Bucs are going to do, which Deshaun Jackson said, or tweeted, I should say, "We got this. I personally will make sure we show how valuable Deshaun is to our team." In short form, Matthew, do you buy or sell a bounce-back year for Deshaun Jackson?
I buy a bounce-back year for Deshaun Jackson, and yet I still don't want him on my team, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I will say I like Jameis Winston this year as a sleeper. I mean, last year he was every year. I know. Every year. I know.
I mean, go back to Hard Knocks.
Yes.
Where his own coach was like, basically saying, I thought this was going to be the year the mistakes changed, and they weren't changing in the preseason. Right. And I got to be honest with you, that influenced me fantasy-wise because they were still there. I mean, when is the year where he puts it together?
I think it potentially could be this year. Tampa Bay's...
But
give me why. Okay. First off, last year, Tampa Bay's offensive line was awful. They also had no running game. Those are two things that I believe they will address in the draft and the rest of free agency. Listen, I don't know that their offensive line is going to be suddenly amazing. I do think it will be better than it was last year.
Yeah, it already is.
But in terms of performance, right? I mean, on paper it obviously already is. But I'm just saying, I think in terms of what we see on the field, I think it will be. I think there'll be more of a connection there with Deshaun. The truth of the matter is when you go back and watch the tape, they took shots to Deshaun Jackson. They would miss by this much. Like so many times they just couldn't connect and get on the same page. And that's a rhythm thing. That's a timing thing. That's honestly, I don't think, sometimes this sounds crazy to say, but you don't realize how fast Deshaun Jackson is. He's just insanely fast. And so my expectation is you see this, I think a better year. He'd almost have to have a better year than he did last year. I think the Buccaneers offense will be better. So that's why I think Jameis Winston, because I'm a big Mike Evans fan. Another year of O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. I like Chris Godwin and what I saw out of him in limited time last year. So I think they have some nice weapons there for Winston to take yet another step. He's still in the same offense. He's still in Dirk Cutter's offense. So they throw, if you look at the underlying numbers, Jameis Winston actually had a better year than you might realize as well. As for Deshaun Jackson, I do buy a bounce back year for him. But again, he's one of those big play guys. That offense runs through Mike Evans' field. Don't mind him as a number 4 wide receiver, I guess, but not somebody I'd want to count on week in, week out and season long.
We're 16 days now from the start of the 2018 NFL draft. I'm going to listen. Daniel sort of wanted to see if we could get some insight into what might happen. I think the reality is that there are a few sure things in this year's NFL rookie class at fantasy relevant positions.
Saquon Barkley
is basically it.
Yeah.
But the wide receiver class has no sure thing. The tight end class has.
There's like one or there's. Well,
listen, I grew up in Texas. I grew up in College Station, so I have a soft spot for Christian Kirk. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's any rookie wide receiver
who might not go into the middle 100%, of the third round 100%. Or top of the second.
I'm rooting for him, but yeah, right. I'm with you. There's no one that you're things. Right.
So what would make more? What we're going to do is once the draft is over, we're going to have a podcast to contextualize guys that landed in ideal fits, maybe guys who landed somewhere that might mean you're going to have to take a redshirt season before you start to see fantasy relevance, and of course, plenty of quarterback talk because the 2018 NFL draft will be defined by that run on quarterbacks early on.
And there'll also be some players who lose fantasy value because you're like, oh, this guy's got the job all to himself, and then all of a sudden somebody gets drafted, and then you're like, oh, that's different.
This might be the first year that I'm actually more interested in like the pictures of teams as a whole after the draft than like
the individuals
and where they go. And I think part of that is what we've seen with some of these new young up-and-coming coaches and GMs, like, for example, in San Francisco, and some of the moves that were made in free agency, which is so much more than we've seen in the past. So I'm looking forward to after the draft, not so much the draft, but after the draft to kind of look on the board and see where did all these guys go and how did the storylines shape up.
The last piece of news we'll address today would have been crazy to talk about a week and a half ago when the NFL owners' meetings were taking place in Orlando because Odell Beckham Jr. is I don't even need to try to describe the amount of talent he has. It goes beyond description.
Yeah.
But it's clear that the Giants have either entertained or are still entertaining a trade of Odell Beckham Jr.
Well, for me, Trey Wingo tweeted something like this, and I sort of retweeted and added to it, but Field is kind of the NFL insider here. I'm curious your thoughts here. But, Trey's thought, and I added to this, was that, like, if the Giants didn't want this talk going on, they could easily come out and say very definitively, Odell Beckham Jr. is a Giant. He's not going anywhere. We're hopeful to sign him to a long-term deal, but he will not be traded 100%, end of story. And they didn't say that. They've sort of left the door open. He's a Giant for now. He's, we'll see, etc. Talking to your sources, Field, around the league, your thoughts on a potential Odell Beckham Jr. trade. How real is this talk?
What's real is that the Giants were entertaining the idea of trading Odell Beckham Jr. And the asking price was close to 2 first-round picks, as Adam Schefter and others reported. Or as Adam Schefter reported, I believe. Whether that actually happens feels like a long shot. You just don't see 2 first-round picks traded for a player. I mean, it's very infrequent. The last wide receiver to command that was Joey Galloway to the Dallas Cowboys. Different time, different era. Because you're not only trading 2 first-round picks for Odell Beckham Jr., you're probably then committing a contract in excess of $17 million per season to keep him around long-term. We saw what the Browns gave up to trade for Jarvis Landry.
Sure.
It was a 4th and a 7th-round pick. That's modest. Now, Landry is not near the player that Beckham is, but he's 400 catches in his first 4 seasons is the best ever by an NFL wide receiver. So I think that a trade is not a guarantee. The Giants remain open for business. The closer we get to the draft, the less likely a trade is, because once the draft is passed, if he's still a Giant, he will remain a Giant for at least the 2018 season. But he's got part of the consideration is not just the player, the personality, but he shattered his ankle last year, Stephania, in week 3.
And everybody is like, well, so should we just assume he's fine? I think because you see him and you see people talking about him, but it's one of those that I would say we don't really know until we get into training camp where you're going to see him. I don't know what his activity will be like in the offseason. We hear that he is reporting, expected to report for offseason workouts. But we don't know. We won't really know until we see him moving. Part of the attraction to him as a talent is his ability to get up in the air. It's just so he handles his body and space so well.
Yep.
And part of doing that is because when you land, you're confident in how your legs are going to support you. When you've essentially he had 2 injuries, because remember he injured his ankle and he missed the very first game, and then he came back and he injured it again, and that time it was far more serious with a fracture. But it was always in getting tangled up or coming down from trying to make a catch. So even if his ankle is quote unquote 100% recovered, is he the same player? Sometimes it takes guys a little bit to get over the mental hurdle of wondering how good he's going to feel. Are they worried about traffic around them? I mean, these are things that are really hard to quantify, but they're very real for some athletes coming back from an injury like this.
It'll be really interesting to see that if Odell Beckham does not get traded, Field, does he re-sign with the Giants? Because I could certainly see him saying, you know what? This is an organization that, and he's a player. I've never met him. That's not true. I've actually met him once, but I didn't have any kind of real conversation with him. So I don't know the guy. And so, but from a distance, he seems to be, an emotional player, somebody who, an emotional person, somebody who wears his, heart on his sleeve, so to speak. And so he can't feel particularly respected by the Giants the way he's sort of been treated. He believes he's a franchise player. I would agree with that. He doesn't feel like he's been treated that way in New York. I could see him basically saying like, yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna wait this year out and then test the market.
Wait this year out by not playing?
No. He'll play this year. I'm just saying, but like not sign a
Well, you wait this
deal.
year out, and you know what happens? You get a franchise tag,
right?
And then what happens the year after that? You get another franchise tag. Yeah, that's just. I mean, when you're that talented, if the team wants to keep you around, they will keep you around. I think, and here's what I would encourage people to do.
But do you think they would? Do you think the Giants would do that? Given that they don't seem particularly that they don't want to
tag him.
They don't want. It doesn't seem like they want to pay the money.
Well, the difference is they may not want to pay him. He wants to be paid more than like NFL quarterbacks want to be paid.
Right.
They may be willing to go to $17.001 million to get him above Antonio Brown, but they may not be willing to get to $20 million, which is just a different level of pay.
Yep.
I would encourage people to go find Jordan Ranan's piece on the ESPN.com this morning. He laid out the scenarios involving Odell Beckham Jr. from most to least likely. Number 1 is he stays and they get a long-term deal done. Number 2, they trade him. So from there, you get great insight in there from Jordan, who of course is down there, has the pulse of the Giants every single day.
Fantasy-wise, does it change your perspective on Odell Beckham Jr.? Like if for some reason you're drafting today.
Yeah.
I agree.
No matter where he is,
he's still a first rounder, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. He's
we
that
both
kind of talent. He's had bad quarterback play in the past, and he has been
Stephania, your thoughts?
I don't have strong thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't have an issue if someone said like, hey, for whatever reason we're having our draft right now and I'm taking Odell Beckham Jr. in the first round. Would you be like, no, don't do that? Or you be like, I don't have an issue with that?
I think you understand the risk, but the reward payoff is so potentially high that you could make the case for it.
It certainly is. Speaking of first round of the draft, after, I guess, all 7 rounds of the draft, we'll do a podcast Monday, April 30th. We'll be back. And, of course, the Ranking Summit is that week. We've got plenty of content. It's our most expansive week of the Fantasy Summit ever. There will be some consumable content, if I'm not mistaken, available through ESPN Plus, which is our new company-wide subscription-based app that you can find. I believe it's $4.99 per month.
Yeah.
Streaming service. I think it launches
April 12th.
April 12th.
So in a couple of days.
Yeah,
you can certainly count on that being a great investment. And in the meantime,
I'm pretty psyched, by the way. Just saying, I went to, not to be a shill, but I went to the presentation to see what it's going to offer.
Pretty awesome.
And I was like, whoa. And I have Apple TV.
What were you like?
I was like, whoa.
One more time.
Like, Beth might have to come over and watch some ESPN Plus.
Yeah, there you go.
But you can have, get this, you can have 4 different things going at once with this.
Awesome.
And you have all
screen,
the 30 for 30 library on demand and all this new content. And what you have on April 12th isn't what you will have forever. There's new things in the works. And so I'm really excited, actually, that some of our content from the Fantasy
There'll
Summit
definitely be
is
some more.
there.
There'll be some more fantasy content, starting with some behind the scenes stuff, some fantasy show stuff from the podcast that'll be on ESPN Plus. I think you'll mention another podcast. I think you'll see some stuff on TV as well. ESPN Plus, look, it's $5 a month. It's $5 a month. Like, you
finally can have one less drink on Friday night with Beth and already be making her money back.
You think, by the way, listen, if you think Stephania and Beth pay for one drink Friday nights, they do not. Oh my God. A lot of thirsty dudes out there, from what I understand. So believe me, they didn't pay for any of their own drinks. But yes, it's like the equivalent of a coffee. You know what I mean? Like a coffee, one of them
like a nice
high-end
latte.
places.
Yeah.
Like a nice latte.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like one of Field's craft beers. That's what it is. It's like it's like that.
Speaking of,
right.
I mean, Field's Instagram. I just look for the design of the cans, and then he has posting the different craft beers are outstanding.
It's my happy
ideas.
place.
Yeah,
if you have any suggestions of craft beers, please send them along. I take any and all suggestions. By the way, again, congratulations to Kyle.
To Thirsty Kyle.
And
awesome.
Marisa.
Yeah, Marisa is very excited. I got a note here.
Marisa, by the way, in for the happy hour.
She's already, yeah, Thirsty Kyle's already talked to her and she's like, I'm in for that. So yeah, I give you advice and literally like within an hour, you've already violated it. Like you should have kept Stephania and Marisa far away from each other. I don't know what you're doing.
Oh, far away. Got it. That was the solution. It was to not let it happen.
Yes, that's right.
Stephania, I want to give you, any thoughts on your Friday night with my wife?
Oh, it was our night, and I don't need to share it.
Some things will remain
That's right.
private. We'll be back on April 30th. Talk to you then.
Peace out.
The theme song of the Fantasy Focus was created and performed by Eric Hutchinson. Check out more of his music at erichutchinson.com. Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Focused Football Podcast. For more great podcasts, listen on the ESPN app or subscribe on iTunes.